Any Simpsons fan will tell you that October is the most exciting month of the year, because it marks the return of the beloved classic Simpsons Treehouse of Horrors special. While we're obsessed with this always awesome Halloween satire episode, these behind-the-scenes facts might make things a little spookier. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell to stay up to date with the latest content from ScreenRant. Starting in the second season of The Simpsons in 1990, the Treehouse of Horror episodes became an instant fan favorite and a Halloween staple for millions. The family's reimaginings of horror classics with a satirical twist have always been one of the high points in the show's 25 years on the air. But while they might seem effortlessly amazing, the writers have always said that these are actually the hardest episodes to get right. Because they're always broken up into 3 spooky stories, they have to move incredibly fast and fit in 3 times as much material as a standard episode. Scarily enough, they almost didn't continue making them after the 3rd installment, which included Clown Without Pity, Z for Zombies, and King Homer. Good thing the writers changed their minds, as no Halloween season is complete without these special episodes. With 25 seasons under their belt, it's totally natural that the creators of The Simpsons would start looking for ways to shake things up. One of the ways they did this in the later Treehouse of Horror episodes was to have their infamous couch gags reimagined by different masters of the genre. While the Treehouse intros have always featured classic Easter eggs like tombstones reading Garfield, Disco, I'm with Stupid, or even amusing tombstones, these guest spots took things to a whole other level. They brought in Ren and Stimpy co-creator John Kricfalusi, who let his imagination run wild with a creepy Halloween song in his signature style. And Guillermo del Toro sank his teeth into an intro totally packed with amazing horror genre references from his favorite movies. Both are wildly different, experimental, and bursting with the Halloween spirit. There have been a ton of different influences and inspirations for these episodes over the years, but the original inspiration for the entire concept might actually surprise you. EC Comics was a company that was responsible for the classic Tales from the Crypt and Weird Science, and it's from these comics that the writers of the show became inspired to go all out for Halloween. Because these comic books were so out there and over the top and unafraid to be scary, they were the perfect creepy source material for The Simpsons to parody, and Treehouse of Horror was born. Another fun fact about the humble beginning of these classic episodes is that they were named Treehouse of Horror after the family treehouse, in which Lisa and Bart would share their scary stories on that fateful October night back in 1990. One of the earliest and most recognizable pioneers of horror and science fiction TV was, of course, The Twilight Zone, which also happened to become another huge influence for the Treehouse of Horror episodes. In fact, The Simpsons have drawn more inspiration and parodied The Twilight Zone more times than any other source material out there. The very first Treehouse sketch, Hungry Are the Damned, was taken from the Twilight Zone tale To Serve Man. After that, the black and white sketch, The Bart Zone, was borrowed from the episode It's a Good Life. The evil Krusty the Doll story, Clown Without Pity, was a spin on Twilight Zone's Living Doll. And one of the best-loved Treehouse sketches, Nightmare at 5.5 Feet, was inspired by the Twilight Zone episode Nightmare at 20,000 Feet. And the list goes on. Remember the tombstones from the opening credits that we mentioned earlier, with all of the amazing Easter eggs hidden on them? Well, even though they might be one of our favorite parts of the Treehouse of Horror legacy, the creators of the show ran into a bit of trouble with them later on. While they began as pretty scathing social and pop culture commentary, like the ones reading American workmanship and subtle political satire, by Treehouse number 3, they moved on to something a little more pointed. The tombstones read Fish Police, Family Dog, and Capital Critters. All of those titles are references to TV shows created by Steven Spielberg, Tim Burton, and Steve Bochco, respectively, all of which were quickly canceled and had been labeled by critics as studio ripoffs trying to capitalize on the success of The Simpsons. Ouch. The creators of The Simpsons are big James Earl Jones fans, and why wouldn't they be? Not only is he the voice of Darth Vader, he's also Mufasa, and to this day is the only guest starring voice actor to appear in all 3 segments of a Treehouse of Horror episode. In the first ever Treehouse of Horror, James first lent his voice to the mover who helps the Simpsons move into the old haunted house that drives them insane. He then does an absolutely amazing job narrating the Simpsons' take on the classic Edgar Allan Poe poem, The Raven. Finally, he takes on the character of Sarok the Preparer, the alien chef and friend of Kang and Kodos, who gleefully plans to eat the Simpsons. For Sarok, he actually chewed on a cookie while recording his lines in order to really nail the drooling. While the Simpsons used to be known for being pretty politically shrewd and not shying away from making their fair share of commentary, that isn't really what they're known for anymore. But in a surprisingly late Treehouse of Horror episode from 2006, part of a segment called The Day the Earth Looked Stupid went a little bit too far for the network's liking. The section was a satire on Orson Welles' classic The War of the Worlds broadcast, in which everyone in Springfield except for Lisa falls for the idea that aliens have invaded Springfield. When Kang and Kodos eventually do show up, the town falls to ruins. Years later, the aliens are seen wondering out loud why the humans don't consider them liberators, and referencing the US occupation of Iraq. There was an even more direct line about it that was removed by censors before broadcast. One of the most famous Treehouse of Horror moments may seem like it was totally original, but knowing how much the Simpsons creators love to reference other source material, it's not so surprising that it isn't. In the segment The Devil and Homer Simpson, there is a trial between the devil, who it turns out is Ned Flanders, and Marge over who has the right to Homer's eternal soul. While they await trial, Homer is sent to hell and winds up in the ironic punishment division, where he is fed enough donuts to drive someone insane. Fortunately, Homer isn't just anybody, and he takes to the punishment with relish. While the original cartoon was made in 1937, it is way more disturbing than the Treehouse of Horror parody. Harry Potter became such a massive phenomenon after its release in 1997 that it's almost hard to believe that there are people out there who haven't read it. Well, this was exactly the case when a Harry Potter spoof was pitched as part of the 2001 Treehouse of Horror segment, Whiz Kids. The creators of The Simpsons have said that they almost didn't go with the sketch, as only a very small number of them were familiar with The Boy Who Lived at the time. They decided to do it anyway, and the scene in which the young wizards turn frogs into often miserable-looking princes in class was an instant hit. Funnily enough, the first Harry Potter movie adaptation, The Sorcerer's Stone, arrived in theaters not even 2 weeks after the episode aired. In the movie, divination is, of course, much less disturbing. There was an episode of The Simpsons that became infamous because of the statement it was blatantly making about being asked by the network to add in newer, funkier characters in order to spice things up. Itchy, Scratchy, and Poochie was the creators' answer to that request, and it was clear that they weren't interested in the note. But a little-known fact is that one of the characters from that episode was actually supposed to be in a Treehouse of Horrors episode. Roy Simpson, the hip family member who shows up in the Poochie episode and leaves, never to be seen again, was originally supposed to appear in the time-traveling segment Time and Punishment. The scene was ultimately deleted from the episode, but clearly stuck with Matt Groening and the rest of the team, who would bring him back later. The Treehouse of Horror segment, The Night of the Dolphin, is an extremely strange and kind of confusing episode. While it is pretty violent towards the end, it doesn't really feel that much like a real Halloween episode because of, well, the dolphins. While most believe that it is a reference to Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds, and it kind of is, the source material is actually a lot more specific. The Day of the Dolphins is actually a totally real thriller movie from 1973 with an unbelievable premise. A doctor by the name of Jake Terrell spent years training a pod of dolphins to speak and understand English, and just as he achieves his breakthrough, they are stolen and going to be used in an assassination. It's an amazingly wacky idea. It makes the Treehouse of Horror parody episode finally make perfect sense years later. Who knows why or for what reason certain lines stick out to the writers and become their favorites. And out of all the amazing jokes in Simpsons history, Matt Groening's favorite might just surprise you. He could have chosen any amazing Lionel Hutz, Skinner, Milhouse, or Homer classic, but instead his absolute favorite moment from the entire series came from one of the Treehouse of Horror segments. And while you might imagine that it would be from the brilliant The Shining parody, The Shining, Matt Groening has admitted to never having even seen the movie, so most of that segment was totally lost on him. His #1 line of all time actually belongs to comic book guy in the segment The Omega Man. Right before a nuclear blast destroys the world, comic book guy's last words are a pretty grim realization. Oh, I've wasted my life. While it may seem tame today in comparison to shows like South Park, Family Guy, Rick and Morty, and the intensely dark and very adult BoJack Horseman, The Simpsons was actually considered extremely boundary-pushing and edgy for its time. The creators of the show dealt with a ton of pushback from Congress about censorship, to the point where they just couldn't take it anymore, and decided to make a statement. In Season 6's Treehouse of Horror, David Merkin made the very pointed decision to make each segment as disturbing as possible, in a direct response to Congress having labeled the show as having excessive violence. That's the exact reason why poor innocent groundskeeper Willie takes an axe to the back in every segment of the episode. First by an insane Homer, then surprisingly by Maggie, and then finally by Principal Skinner. While two aliens from outer space might not scream Halloween to the most of us, Kang and Kodos became an absolute staple of the Treehouse of Horror episodes. In fact, they have appeared in every single one to date. Originally inspired by 2 Star Trek characters, Kang and Kodos usually bumble their attempts at striking fear into the hearts of the Simpsons characters characters more than they have actually succeeded. They even starred in one of the best Treehouse sketches called Citizen Kang, which sees the pair taking the places of then presidential candidates Bill Clinton and Bob Dole, inspiring the citizens of Springfield to forever be twirling towards freedom, before it ends in disaster and enslavement. Sometimes the writers would even use the pair in their drawn-out moments of maniacal laughter in order to fill their full 20-minute time slot. While the Treehouse of Horror episodes are clearly meant to be more funny than scary, sometimes things turn out pretty genuinely creepy. We're thinking specifically of the end of Nightmare at 5.5 Feet, with Bart calmly on his way to an asylum before the gremlin pops up and dangles Flanders' decapitated head in front of him. While the truly creepy moments are few and far between, the creators of the show were actually worried early on that they would scare audiences a little too much. That's why they began having Marge come out before the show to let everyone know that things were about to get dark, lightening the mood for the episode to come. While the intros did become a classic staple, the writers quickly grew tired of finding new ways to do them, and they were abandoned. And there they are, some of the darkest and most awesome behind-the-scene facts about the Simpsons Treehouse of Horror. What did you think of this list? And what is your favorite Treehouse of Horror segment? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to ScreenRant to keep up to date with our newest content.